Neil Doherty? No!
There's the call drop.
Yeah, that is, yeah.
I'll take it.
Surprise!
So modern.
Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Atul Rana.
Hello.
Neil Almond.
Good to be here.
Shannen Doherty.
Hello.
And Jonny Hall.
Hello, how you doing?
And this week, we're going to recreate a panel from MassConf 30, Thinking Deeply About Mathematics Education, and in particular, the use of manipulatives in the mathematics classroom from age 0 to age 16 and beyond. And so my first question goes to you, Shannen. Manipulatives are expensive, often cumbersome, and require a significant amount of professional development time. Are they worth it?
Yes, which was my answer on Saturday at the panel. Just yes. Yeah, I think I'm yet to see a concept where I haven't used manipulatives and it's been more successful than if I had. If we think back to my sort of NQT year where they weren't really being used, the quality of my lessons was a lot lower. I was a new teacher, so there was that element to it as well. But I wasn't able to get them to behave mathematically like we did in Jonny's session at MathsConf. They weren't making generalizations. They weren't seeing the structures of maths. And I think we need to be using them regardless of their expense, or if it's a bit of a pain having to get them out of whatever cupboard they're gathering dust in.
I think I chipped in as well with like expensive medical equipment. That's really expensive and it's cumbersome and stuff. But you wouldn't recommend not using that because that can save lives. And that was quite a dramatic statement to make, I think. But I thought but then I make the point that if you do become mathematically illiterate, then that will actually change your life for the better. You'll be able to do what you want in the world rather than just being sort of a slave to some sort of machine. You can actually be proactive and do whatever you want in the world. And they require effort. Like anything that's worthwhile probably requires effort to learn and use well. And I'm sure we'll come on to that later as we talk about the learning curve of manipulatives and things like that. But in a nutshell, yes, they're definitely not a waste of time.
As an observer in that, I really like that metaphor, Jonny, and it's definitely one that I will put in the back pocket if ever a head teacher asks why should we spend X amount of money on a certain manipulative because of those reasons. As Shannen said, it's difficult to get them to behave mathematically. My experience of them was it's really difficult to get kids to actually just behave when you have the manipulatives out. So, but yeah, definitely worth it, and definitely worth investing that time in understanding how they work best.
And for me, it was a more pragmatic, practical point that there are some manipulatives that aren't very expensive at all. Paper is a manipulative. You can use that to demonstrate a whole bunch of stuff. So if you really do want to get started and budget is an issue, you can use paper as quite a sophisticated manipulative as well.
And I know you're a big fan of the subitizing as well, aren't you? Atul, with the old playing cards, dominoes and things like that. Everyone has them lying around and they don't cost much at all. Subitizing, supertizing. Pick your side of the fence.
With Jack Hartman.
Didn't we have a long, didn't we almost dedicate an entire episode to subitizing or supertizing at one point?
I just came out confused.
I reckon the Yorkshire in me just wants to say subitizing because we tend to make things as easy as possible to say. Supertizing just requires that little bit too much effort, even if it is correct.
I mean, I totally agree with where you guys are coming from. I think, what did I follow up with? How do we develop our use of manipulatives, and how do we convince head teachers to invest in our resources?
I think you just have to show them the manipulatives in action, don't you? That, you know, the proof is in the pudding, and they need to see it to believe it, I guess, whether that is going to a maths comp, whether it's going to another CPD, whether it's just them seeing them in a lesson and taking that punt and buying you some. But unless you've got a particularly proactive head, then you probably do need to just say, just come in and just watch me in action with them. And hopefully you'll see the way it does unlock the maths for the kids.
I do think there's some massive, almost like quick wins for manipulatives, like the 2-colour counters with directed number. When I first stumbled across that just blew my mind on like how easy it is to teach the whole of directed number without saying 2 negatives make a positive and muttering that immortal phrase. And once you've said that phrase, that's it, you've lost kids. That's it. 2 negatives make a positive, regardless of what context they're using them in. But you can teach the whole of addition and subtraction with directed number, and it's really powerful. And yeah, so maybe if they saw something like that, one of the really super sort of like obvious super duper uses of manipulatives, that might convince them a little bit. I don't know though, but they're really cheap as well, 2-colour counters, to be fair. So it's all like 30 quid for about 2,000 of or something, isn't it? So it's not that bad. So when you start asking for like $1,000 for 10 or 20 boxes of Q's and air or something like that, that's when it gets trickier, I guess.
We PTA did some fundraising for us. We got about just under $1,000, I think it was. So I just thought, oh, how many Cuisenaire rods can I actually get? How many sets of Cuisenaire rods from like the Cuisenaire company?
The official ones,
yeah. The official ones, not the dodgy ones you can get from some other resource sites.
I have lots of dodgy ones.
It wasn't a lot. I was like, I don't think we probably can yet. But as Jonny said, I think it's just I think one thing that every head teacher, certainly in primary, understands is that time and the curriculum in the maths curriculum necessarily, you know, there's that they do go against each other slightly, but showing how repeated addition with an area model, and showing how multiplication is an area model, and how then, you know, when you get to multiplying decimals as well, area model, and you just be like, if we invest in all of this stuff, like, we will create more time to work on the more interesting stuff that's going to raise you those SATs scores, because that's effectively what it can come down to. But you need to invest, you know, time and money initially and front load that to kind of get it. But it's a long-term investment, and I kind of feel that on the whole, schools aren't great at long-term thinking. They want
well, no, especially when you're talking about the area model, that is like the longest term investment you get, because I'm still using that when I'm dealing with 15 and 16-year-olds. Come their GCSE time, we're still doing the area model. If you set those foundations in primary, like a little investment in Dean's blocks, introducing the concrete area model, it'll last them 16 years, like until they're ready to do the GCSEs.
I'd say even beyond. You can do calculus with area optimization and volume beyond. It's such a beautiful, elegant model, the area model.
I don't have the luxury of teaching A-level maths, but like, I do wonder how many opportunities there are for manipulatives in A-level maths as well.
Well, it's probability and dice throwing and all of that stuff. I've used them with third-year engineering undergraduates and things. I used to show, it's just like sometimes you need to show a thing, like if there's, my example was heat transfer differential equations, but if you're doing heat transfer through 2 or 3 layers of things, just get the actual thing out. It's what Mark McCord also talks about. He brings them out with undergraduates because it's tactile, and that's one of the reasons we use manipulatives, is it's hands-on, tactile. It makes sense.
So basically you're saying whatever level of maths you're at, there's probably some sort of physical object, some manipulative that you can utilize to try and make sense of a concept.
I remember, Jonny, you made a really good point about how to develop or how to approach our CPD.
Did I? Kickstart my memory, Kieran, because I can't. It's been a long day at school.
Was it about being deliberate in your decision making?
Yeah. So like you like pick a manipulative and pick a topic. And if you're going to do a CPD session on that, if you're going to do prime factor tiles, for example, if that's going to be a manipulative choice, and then really drill down on a couple of topics that you want to do with that. So for example, like the prime factorization, fundamental theorem of arithmetic, drill down into that and then show how it can be used to look at things like highest common factor, lowest common multiple, and things like that, and show a real use for the manipulative, and drill down on one particular topic and get that nailed, sort of thing, so that everyone knows when this topic's coming up, I've had this CPD for this particular topic, let's give it a shot, rather than maybe a more general, okay, here's a bunch of Q's and air rods, let's maybe just do like a whirl. It's like a whistle stop of loads of different things. I think if you're doing it with the department, really drill down. I know at maths comps, because I only have 50 minutes and I'm talking to whole rooms and they're not my department, I'll kind of take maybe like the best bits of little things to do like a showcase, if you like. And maybe you'd want to do that for your first couple of sessions or your first session, just to get people enthused. And that's kind of like my aim when I do these maths comp sessions. I want people leaving thinking, oh, that was cool. I want to try and do this in the department. But when it comes to the nitty gritty, you need to have a bit more of a structured plan. Okay, we're going to do this specific topic because this is coming up on the schema work, and this manipulative would lend itself really well for this particular topic.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think being that specific about what you want to get better at, and then you'll see those incremental improvements over a long period of time. So yeah, totally with you. I mean, Atul, if I can throw the next question to you, what should teachers be wary of when using manipulatives?
Yeah, so Jonny covered a bit of that with saying, like, you need to know what that manipulative is trying to convey and what the idea is, and get good at it. As mathematicians and maths teachers, we tend to, so going back to the point of using manipulatives, we tend to be already very fluent in working in the abstract. So to give an example of working with negatives and positives, we already know what those means, and we know what it means to add and subtract. So to kind of think it from a novice's point of view can be quite difficult. So it's to kind of just put yourself in the novice's shoes. And so let's say we are working with positives and negatives, and there's a great series of videos by Bernie Westacott on this and Craig Barton's podcast. I reckon that is just excellent CPD just for using counters for positives and negatives and adding and subtracting, etc. Is to actually see how the manipulative conveys the meaning, what a zero pair is, and spend due diligence working with your colleagues first, actually just putting yourself in the shoes of your students by pretending to not be a novice, and then kind of reverse engineer it, and then try. Then, like, once you've got a plan, as Jonny says, then try it with your students. And when you're learning how to use manipulatives to teach, it's not going to go to plan. Like, people, as behaving mathematically as could be behaving, manipulatives might be all over the place. So it is also that as well. So you learn from what happened and what didn't happen, and then take it to the next, and ask the colleagues who are more experienced manipulatives. We have a whole community here. So yeah, before investing in manipulatives, training is what I'd say. Yeah.
When you use a manipulative, it's not just used to get to the answer to a question. And Q's and air rods, for example, it's dead easy to do, say, 17 plus 16, get a number track, get a 10 and a 7 rod, a 10 and a 6 rod, stick them all on the number track, read off the answer, boom, I can do addition. Well, that's not getting you any that's not getting you any better at addition. It's not understanding the structure of how addition works when we're looking at the units and the tens. It's much better, like I do with my little 4-year-old, make the 17, make the 16. Oh, we've got a 10 and a 7, a 10 and a 6. I can bring the two 10s together to make 20. What can I do with the 7 and the 6? Well, if I put them together, that's the length of a 10 and a 3 rod. So now I've got 3 10s and I've got 3 left over. I've got 33, and that's showing the structure of the maths. So that's my key thing. Yeah, don't use manipulatives as just a tool to get the answer. Actually use them to show the underlying structure. And the second thing relates to what Atul says. Yeah, don't expect your first couple of lessons to be the best you've ever done. It does take a while. And going back to Atul's point, yeah, practice with your department first. Hopefully you've got these CPD sessions. Hopefully you've got some expert in your department who can actually get you started on these, and practice on each other. Literally just have little mini lessons where you're actually trying to explain a concept, either under a visualizer or whatever, using virtual ones. I'm sure we'll get onto those later as well. And then, yeah, practice with your department, and then take it live into the classroom.
I'll echo what Jonny and Atul said about knowing your manipulative and knowing the kind of the maths that it lends itself to, because I think for a while in primary, it was a bit fashionable to have all the manipulatives out on the table, and there were trays with, you know, different sections on, and schools were very proud of them, but there was never a real purpose to them. It was sort of like, okay, now show me with the manipulatives.
So you had them all out at the same time?
Yeah, it was real common practice, but it's like,
it was the done thing, and it was like the impressive thing if you had a tray with different compartments in it.
And the children
schools spent a lot of money on, and children they just chose them.
Yeah, they'd magically choose the right manipulative for the right job, and then, you know, jobs are good. And yeah, I didn't know that long ago.
It wasn't that long ago.
No.
It's still probably common practice in lots of places, because they haven't had the training and the investment in understanding how to use them. But
there never was any training, was there? I'm thinking like when mastery is kind of used casually now, when those first sort of quote unquote programs started rolling out and they talked about manipulatives, you know, there was never any training that actually told you which manipulative to use. It's just like, yeah, there's these things called manipulatives, they're really cool, just go and use them.
Use them and you'll get better.
Training. I had training from the London South East Maths Hub with a man called Declan, and he just blew my mind with how he used them and how specific he was about them, rather than having them all out and saying kind of go for it. Yeah, go wild. Which is why I sort of have that opinion of being really specific and really intentional with what you're using and why you're using it, and not just using them for the sake of having them out or thinking it's going to tick a box in a maths observation or something, or a booklet. And I think maths leaders and school leaders have to have that sort of that conversation of that progression of what manipulatives are used where and why and how and for what concepts, and which lend themselves to, you know, addition best, which lend themselves to fractions. What are our alternatives if something really isn't clicking for a child? And all of that should be laid out in a curriculum, as far as I'm concerned, rather than leaving teachers to just find their feet with it, because they inevitably won't.
The only thing I want to say is just, I think Jonny hit the nail on the head, where it's something that you've talked about as well, Kieran. It's about using the manipulative not as a calculator, but as a tool to identify the underlying structures. But of course,
uncovers that.
Yeah, but then that kind of goes to show that perhaps a curse of knowledge between us on this group is that actually you need to know the underlying structures of the problems that you're trying to then work out. And I imagine if you asked, you know, some primary school teachers, maybe some secondary teachers, I don't know, you know, what are the underlying structures of this problem? You know, they might look at you blankly and say, I don't know what you mean by that.
I remember doing a staff training on the bar model, and a couple of teachers going, I just don't like it. I don't get it. It doesn't give me the solution. It doesn't actually help find the answer. Well, it's not meant to calculate for you. It's meant to show you the structure so that our children can understand the maths they're doing. But it took a long time to show them the structures that there were. So I think we just need a hell of a lot more professional development.
If only there was
a thing.
If only there was a thing out there.
Well, we do have a CPD college at Complete Maths, which you might want to check out with all these courses. Shameless plug. It's almost like you set that plug up for me, though. But yeah, no, we do. Yeah, I'm busy, and Kieran as well is helping me out as well, recording a load of courses in the CPD college for all the manipulatives. And me and Kieran have got a top secret project underway, which we're not going to tell you yet.
Oh,
Can you tell us when we stop recording?
But it's going to be a joint course between me and Kieran involving manipulatives. So more info when me and Kieran have fleshed out the actual contents of the course. But it promises to be a good one. So yeah.
I mean, it could take a while, because whenever I sent Johnny some videos, he said, "What do you want me to do with this?"
That's not true.
Can't work with this.
I mean, the next one's perfect for you, Johnny. Obviously you've got the wonderful mathspot.com, which so many of us use as much as possible. Do manipulatives need to be physical, or will virtual alternatives work just as well?
It depends, and it's sometimes they will work just as well. Sometimes they will work better, and sometimes they just will not be as good. For example, anything involving 3 dimensions, like volumes and things like that, using the cues and air rods in real life are probably going to be better for that. Plans and elevations, for example, actually building those out of Milter-Link cubes is always going to be better than a virtual version of, essentially a virtual version is going to be a 2D representation of a 3D model, which is, there's that extra layer for students to grasp. So it's not clear cut. There's use cases for both of them. I mean, the main sort of virtual use cases, and I know you touched on it before, Kieran, like this accuracy that you get with the virtual ones, like the fact that you can just bang up an area model pixel perfect in a couple of seconds, compared to maybe fiddling around with the Dean's blocks under a visualizer and trying to get 12 little yellow units into a nice rectangle. Might take you 30 seconds, so you can do it in 3 seconds on a virtual site. So it's trade-offs. And I will mention that paper that you showed me as well, which surprised me, because I'd never seen it before. There was a paper that Kieran shared, I'm sure you can dig the name out, which basically said that in some instances, putting the physical manipulative behind a sort of pane of glass help the students grasp the concept better than if they could actually touch the object. And it's something to do with the salience of the object. I think, Kieran, you can probably put a bit more flesh onto that. But that surprised me, in that not letting children touch the object actually gave them a better grasp of the concept, which I'd never read anything like that before. So I found that really interesting. But in a nutshell, there's pros and cons to both. And it's just pick whatever's the most suitable in the classroom at the time.
The talk I've just recently been doing talks about the salience of resources making transfer more difficult. And so if something's really, really real, it may make it a little bit more difficult to sort of put that in the abstract. The paper Johnny had was pretty central to that. And there's also another one where they took a tiny Snoopy and put him in a doll's house and showed the children the study where where Snoopy was. Then they put a teddy bear version in a real house in the exact same place that he was in the doll's house. Because Snoopy was too real, they couldn't transfer from doll's house to real house. So I think there's a lot to it. And also I think with things like circles, we spend a lot of time arguing about how many sides a circle has, but if you look at the definition, it's where all the points are equidistant from the midpoint. Well, there's no easier way to make a circle from its midpoint than by making a virtual version of it. I don't think I could recreate it in real life, as mathematically accurately as that.
Yeah, you're spot on there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I work for those who don't know, I work completely online in a virtual realm anyway. And so for me, virtual manipulatives are a little new to the game, so we're still finding out how they work and how they don't. For me, it's been a few years of experimenting with them, and there's a few. So going back to the point of manipulatives, depends on what you want them to convey. So if you want them to convey volumes, then a virtual manipulative on a 2D canvas is not going to be as good as a real one, hands-on a 3D one. But a lot of stuff is two-dimensional. So the area model is two-dimensional. You can use two-sided counters as two-dimensional. I mean, a lot of my tutees don't have two. First thing I ask parents is, do you have a set of Connect 4s? Because Connect 4s basically are red and yellows, so they're not even two-sided. But you can use red and yellows. You can still make 0 pairs with them. You can just use them as well. So there's just a few examples of things you can do really well with virtual manipulatives. You can make copies. So if you have if you have a X tile and a 2 1 tile, so that's X plus 2. And if you want to group them together, so which is the associative property, you call it X plus 2. And then we can do that on your site, Johnny, for example. So you draw a box around it, and I tell my students that's the process of grouping them together. So we can put parentheses or bracket around these. And then to make multiple copies, you just click the copy button, and you can make as many as quickly as you want. And then that has a meaning, say 3 copies below each other. And when I get them to factorize, I find that actually the physical ones are better because they need to kind of jumble them around until I call it rectangularize something. So
it is when you factorize, and it's sometimes a bit of trial and error before they get that rectangle as well, before you can get
it's harder on the
method to do it.
The real one, you can just like push and shove them around until they become rectangles. So it's the same manipulative, it just works differently virtually.
With all of these, you're talking 2-dimensional models, aren't you? Like I sometimes wonder, like Dean's blocks are obviously 3 dimensions, and I'm assuming like the main use of the 3-dimensionalness of them is like when you get to the 1000 cube to show that 1000 cube. But like I very rarely use the 1000 cube. I mean, I'm not a primary teacher. I'm guessing you bust it out quite a lot in primary to show what the 1000 looks like. But like kids generally, when we get to secondary, that idea of place value is pretty concrete in their minds. So I don't need to get 1000 cube out to show them what 1000 is. So all of the work we do is normally just on the 2D area model. We use the 1, the X, and the X squared tile, which would correlate with the unit, the 10, and the 100 tile in Dean's blocks. So if you gave me a set of Dean's tiles rather than actual Dean's blocks, just flat Dean's blocks, I'd probably get a lot of the utility out of them without ever having to use the extra dimension that they have, which is why I guess they're kind of useful in the virtual world. I always show that relationship between like your 12 times 13 and your X plus 2 times your X plus 3. I always think that's a massive sort of revelation, because you show loads of secondary teachers that, and like they've never made that link that actually 12 times 13 is exactly the same as expanding a pair of binomials. It's sort of like one of those things that's so obvious once you've seen it that you never ever forget it. But unless you've never been shown it, you might never ever make that link.
Making copies very quickly. You can show exponentiation very quickly. So you can take two counters, copy 4, select all 4, make 8, select all 8, and then that sort of thing you can do very quickly.
My Dean's blocks go up to the 9th dimension, I think, on MathSpot, if you really want to. If you want to go down to base 2, and then you can go to like 2 to the 9th power, which is nice to show how binary works. And you can make them negative as well. In fact, what a guy called Alex in Australia that we always chat on one of the sort of socials that we do, he does lots of high level math, and he said, could you make imaginary Dean's blocks as well? So we're talking like complex numbers and things like that. So if you ever multiply by I on MathSpot, you can actually make the Dean's blocks turn imaginary as well, which I don't think you'll ever use in primary, Neil and Shannon, but you never know. You might have a high flyer one day.
We're going to need to release a glossary with this episode.
It's so true.
Virtual gone into imaginary. I like it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about I think the first thing I ever do with MathSpot when I go to Dean's is turn like the 3D bit off.
Same here. I feel as though that default should be 2D. Yeah.
Which is no disrespect to what you do. And the 1000 block is so big that in primary you just like show it like this is what it looks like. If you don't believe me, like, and you can just kind of give it to them and say, well, you can spend your break time counting it if you don't believe me, and you'll be here a while.
You also don't get many thousands
and
in a pack.
No.
So you can't do an awful lot with them. I think I was trying to divvy up the resources during the first lockdown in my school, and I think I ended up with every Key Stage 2 class having like 3,000. So I just put them in one box.
Yeah, and I think that's all you need.
Yeah. As a secondary teacher, the best use I've found for my 1000 block is a little stand for your visualizer to get it a little bit higher from your whiteboard, so you get a bit more sort of surface area.
That's exactly what I do as well online.
My digital cameras on mine.
What I will say, they are really useful for if you've left like enough gap between when you've used them for kind of integers, is when you kind of flip that perspective. So your little 1 is actually going to be 1,000th. Your 10 is what your green rod is actually 100th, and then the 100 square is actually a 10th, and then you're like, well, actually, this is just like one cube. That kind of has been helpful, but in terms of the 3D-ness, that's really the only kind of benefit you get, and that's just a couple of lessons worth until they get that, and then they go on. I think I'd say virtual manipulatives, I think they can be more powerful. Exchanging unitization is something that I think any primary school teacher will tell you. You do as much. Here's 10. You swipe them away, and then magically here comes like a 10, and then it's like, well, hang on, but they were over there, and now like what's going on? The fact that you can just say, draw that, group them together on Mascot, and then click the exchange, and it's just like.
How do you feel about the yellows suddenly becoming green though, or the green becoming yellows when you do that? Because I have had that comment, like, should they all be the same color maybe? And I don't know. I kind of like that there's 4 different colors for them.
I like the colors.
Yeah, I don't think the color has ever been an issue.
And I mean, a lot of schools have those colors, don't they?
Yeah, they're pretty common.
We just have all purple.
Do you?
But,
The colors are consistent across bases, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I think it makes that easier to make the connection.
I remember once I spent like a couple of hours going on every manipulative that is on Mascot and standardizing the colors. So anything that's a 1 or a unit is yellow, and then it's green for any 10 or X that you'll see ever, and it's blue for any X squared or 100 that you'll see, and then red for any 1,000. So that does seem to be almost like a standard color. It would be if like we had an international consensus on these colors for the different powers, but I've done my bit anyway.
Talking about colors and the virtual manipulatives, one thing I really like is on a virtual one, the 0 pairs actually literally do just disappear completely when you merge them. And
it's a lie, they don't.
It's a lie, yeah. I did say that, didn't I? They actually fly off 9,000 pixels to the left or something like that. In later manipulatives though, like I think on other things which disappear, I'm not sure if it's the algebra tiles or the 2-color counters, or one of them, they actually disappear because I'd learned how to code that by then. On the other ones, they just disappear 9,000 pixels to the left.
Regardless.
It's slightly off base when it comes to colours. I'm annoyed that they decided red and yellow for 2-color counters. Like in my head, I would much rather like red and blue, because then like red is positive, blue is a more kind of negative color because you associate it with coldness. And I think
get red and blue ones.
So I don't know if you can change the color.
And blue.
Can you? Yeah. I don't know.
You can change the color on Mascot to whatever you want.
There we go.
Yeah. Because quite often people buy the blue and green is quite a common combo, which
is it?
strikes me as mad because isn't that quite a colorblind sort of combo which people struggle with? But you can choose them to whatever you want. So the default's red and yellow, but you can have whatever you want.
Yeah, I find it an interesting one that the default, when you normally buy them, you normally see them as red and yellow. There must be a reason for it. But I kind of, for that other metaphor of like you associate hotness with, positive and therefore rising, and blue. Negative.
On the tutor forms, it was one of the first examples of use these 2 colors together, because then most people will be able to distinguish between them. Whereas like you say, green and blue, and if you've got any sort of color blindness, you're really going to struggle.
I just like the consistency that you've got this yellow and red, positive 1, negative 1, and then when you go to the algebra tiles, the yellow is still the unit. And you've got that consistency going through when you go to the place value counters. You've got the yellow one as well. It just makes it just sits nicely with me, this color scheme, because I know in other books you'll see that like the unit is red, I think.
Really?
Yeah, so well, how does that work when you try doing 2-color counters? And you basically just bring it in. It's 2 different topics with 2 different manipulatives, but like I quite like the idea of linking the 2 together so they all make sense together, rather than, okay, we're using red and yellows for directed number. Yeah. Now we're doing place value and the red is the unit. And okay. Might confuse kids. I don't know. I mean, I don't teach primary, so I don't know if that would cause an issue, but it just sits nicely with me.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. What about partitioning with 10 frames? Because I've seen red and yellows used quite commonly for that as well.
Yeah, the default color on a 10 frame seems to be red counters, I think.
Red and yellow, right? Yeah. And then they mean something else when you're working with director number, as long as it's clear.
And that feeds really well into the next question, because we're thinking about which manipulative representation has the greatest versatility across school phases. And so if you've got something like a 10 frame or a 5 frame with those counters, I can see uses right the way across school. I mean, I'll start with you, Neil. Which representation is it for you?
For me, always, I say, my talk at MathConf was all about the area model and how it is one of the most useful for reasons we've already explained. And Atul, in one of his math chats lives, I forget his name, so apologies, Atul, and demonstrated how it really was just, it's the same model from multiplying 2-digit numbers to decimals to doing something with some
binomials, two binomials,
with some of those, whatever they may be.
Binomials.
Those binomials, yeah. Which is fine. I know what to do with them, but I don't know what they are. I know I can make it into a rectangle, but what am I doing? So yeah, for me, and I think, as I said, the talk that a big part of that talk is actually thinking about the manipulative that demonstrates the representation. And I think, for me, Cuisenaire rods in combination to kind of create the area model, I think for me has the most flexibility.
I would agree entirely with you with the area model for the best representation. Dean's blocks go into algebra tiles in secondary. You've got a coherent journey of sort of like 10 or so years. And it's just, and I've already mentioned the expanding binomials and the 12 times 13. But then all the factors work you can do with Dean's blocks, then you can do all the factorizing with algebra tiles. So that representation for me is probably the most useful. And I know like sometimes we talk about like fewer but better representations, fewer but more powerful representations. That Dean's block to algebra tiles transition, I don't know anything better than that. But in terms of versatility and fun, am I allowed to say fun? I don't know. Cuisenaire rods for me are, on a completely selfish point of view, they are my favorite manipulative because I think they give the most opportunity to do what I'm sort of like passionate about, and that's behaving mathematically, giving out loads of tasks with like low floor, high ceilings, and just seeing where we can run with the tasks, a bit like I did on my session. There's just so much you can do with them. There's very few mathematical topics that you can't cover in some sort of way with a Cuisenaire rod. I went all the way up to A-level maths at the MathConf session, but I started the task at literally how can you make 4 by adding numbers together, and we ended up at Pascal's triangle and binomial expansion. That versatility is like, I don't think you can beat that with any other manipulative. So Cuisenaire for me for that one.
Yeah, if I already weren't a fan of the rods, I think after your session, Jonny, I would have been a convert, because it was a brilliant session that just showed off the power of them. And I have to be really boring, just like I was on Saturday. I'm sorry, I'm agreeing. It's Cuisenaire rods for me. The versatility, the way you can use them across the board is second to none.
Yeah, I answered this one first on Saturday, and it was again Cuisenaire for me as well.
Clean sweep, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, when I start with tutees, I almost insist that they get a physical set, all of them, whether high attaining or low attaining, primary or secondary, unless they're doing A-level. Almost all of them get Cuisenaires. And with Cuisenaires, just to give my own story, I mean, when I first trained with them, it was at a Dyscalculia course, and I only learned how to use them for things like number bonds, literally just number bonds. And for about 2 years of using Cuisenaire rods, I just used them for number bond stuff. And then I started discovering the LaSalle trading. So if no one had told me you can use them for anything else, I would thought use Cuisenaire rods to help teach number bonds. But then when I started training with going to these MathConfs and Mark Coates courses on Cuisenaire rods, my mind was blown with all the things you can do with it. Fractions, multiples, common multipliers, highest common factor, all the number stuff. You can even use them as quadratic factorizing, as a replacement for algebra tiles. There's so much you can do with them. So it's like, my go-to manipulative. that you can use for a very, very long time. If I even during lockdown, I was just tweeting away from the Cuisinart company because my duty is to play with them. And to go back to the Cuisinart is one of the unusual manipulatives which you can just free play with them in the beginning and see what you come up with. And then, of course, you need the deliberately designed to reveal structure and order. And then you do need a trained teacher to use them. So, but the Cuisinart rods are one of those with free play, fun, and sort of structured learning. Yeah.
I do think, like, if I know, like when you have a kid, or sometimes like you'll get like free books given to you or something like that. You'll go and see like the sort of development nurse, and they'll give you a little thing of like, okay, free books to read. Imagine if every kid just had a little set. Probably not like 1-year-olds because they'll probably swallow them. But as soon as at their age where they're not going to eat the units, like if every kid just got given a set of Cuisinart rods, like my little lad who's like he's 4 now. He's been playing with Cuisinart since he was about sort of like 2.5, since it was safe really for him. And he's just been literally playing with it, making dinosaurs out of him, all sorts of stuff. And then all of a sudden this math starts happening, and like he had a show and tell at his reception school the other week. And like, I mean, I'm not sure many kids took Cuisinart rods in, but my lad did. He basically took, do you know that staircase problem, 1 to 10 and then back down to 1? He took exactly enough rods to make that staircase up and down. And then he said, look, Miss Thompson, an up and down staircase, you can always turn it into a square number. So, I mean, good luck with Emmett at primary school.
I was going to say, we've joked about it before, haven't we, Johnny? But your reception, your son's reception.
Yeah, but he'll have fun. But like on a related note, though, because I remember I told you this story, like I had a real high top set of year 11s a few years ago, and I had a couple of the loveliest girls in like from Italy they were from. And like I just took out the Cuisinart rods to do some sort of proof, I think, during this year 11 lesson, and their faces just lit up. And they started like chattering in Italian to each other. I'm like, what's up, girls? What's going on? And they said, oh, we had these rods when we were in primary school in Italy. And like they just remembered them just like that. So it just goes to show how powerful they are. And it would be lovely if every kid in the country had the opportunity just to play with them and set those good foundations with maths.
Do you wish they were cheaper?
Yeah, that's
if only they were cheaper, yeah.
Someone out there make them cheaper for
if only there was another company out there that sells some manipulatives and can find a way to make some that are cheaper. The best ones I ever saw, I don't know what the company was, but they were weighted. So you know how like Numicon is weighted, but the Cuisinart rods were weighted as well. So if you had a 10 rod or the orange rod, you could put in 2 yellows and you could see that they were balanced as well. So they were quite nice little additional feature that obviously didn't have the nice feel of like the original wood ones, but it was a nice little feature.
I can't imagine they're cheaper, to be honest. If you're looking
no, they won't be cheap. No, I can't imagine they would be cheaper either. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you look at these things and you're just like, well, it's just a bit of like, cut a bit of wood and paint it orange.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
Maybe we'll start making them.
Maybe we will.
Yeah. Or Cuisinart rods safe for 1-year-olds as well. I'm sure we've discussed that, haven't we, before? Like ones that they can't swallow the units for. So like 2-inch cube units.
I've had big ones before.
I had a duty who said, but the orange rod, I have to get the orange rod out of the dog's mouth.
Oh no.
The dog just wanted to do the maths. Can you blame the dog?
I do like it whenever I go to a reception class. That outdoor area just has like different manipulatives that have just been like increased by the factor of like, I don't know, 10 or 20, whatever it is. So like, there's actually they can stand in a 10 frame, or there are double-sided counters that are, the size of a small. I feel that's quite a nice thing. So you just have it out in the area, they can explore those things, and you don't have to worry about them swallowing a little, counter or anything like that.
I'd love to come and do maths in a primary school. I've been saying it for years.
You are more than welcome. Next time you are down, we will have you.
Right, okay. Might hold you to that.
Just like on Saturday, time has absolutely flown. I mean, this is fascinating. They're going to go on for much, much longer. But I think we've given everyone enough to think about. I think tons of fantastic advice, and hopefully it triggers people to think, how can I get the most from the manipulatives I use, or to start using them if they don't currently. So all I have to do is say, thank you very much. Thank you, Atul.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonny.
Thank you very much.
And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.
Teaching together.
Oh,
There you go.
God.
That's perfect. I'm going to cut that and put it after the theme tune.